Hello everyone, Pete Jones from Betfair here. Thanks for tuning into our series previewing the 2020 US presidential election. We're pleased to be joined again this week by political trading expert Tavis Rendell. Tavis, great to see you again.
Morning, Pete. Good to be with you again this week.
We appreciate you being part of this. So today's episode will once again be split into two parts. Firstly, we'll be covering new and ongoing developments on news events in the US and what their impact will be on the election betting markets. In our second instalment, Tavis will provide a brief explainer on the Electoral College, which is the complex system by which a US president is chosen. It's an electoral process unlike any other in the world, and we're here to break it all down for you. Hopefully Tavis can steer us in the right direction with some great betting opportunities, as he has done so far in the first episode. So to kick things off, we're going to start by talking about Kanye West, who's recently announced that he will be running for president as an independent. So Tavis, we know that he's been a vocal supporter of Donald Trump in the past. He's since made comments that he's done with Trump and he's taking off the red hat. Just how serious do you see his presidential bid?
In many ways, this could be quite serious, Pete. I will say, if he's well known for his support of Trump in the past, and following that, he relinquished it publicly. That said, if he's no longer a supporter of Donald Trump, the last thing he should do is run for president, because I can guarantee you the Trump campaign are popping champagne bottles over the mere prospect of Kanye running for president. And I'll tell you why. The Trump campaign strategy at this point, they're facing a double-digit deficit in the polls at the national level. They know their maximum ceiling they're going to get is about 44 to 45% of the national vote. So the only way they can really win is to take away vote from Biden. The best way to do that would be to target his African-American support, which is a pivotal block of the Democratic Party and really the foundation upon which Joe Biden would put together enough votes to become the president. And Kanye could be not just a threat to Biden at the national level, but in specific states where it would really matter, namely Pennsylvania and Michigan, both of which have large African-American populations that would help propel Joe Biden to victory in both of those states. Florida and Wisconsin to a lesser extent, but he still could be a factor. So at the national level, Kanye West isn't going to be a factor. But could he be enough of a factor to siphon away 2 to 3% of the vote from Joe Biden? Absolutely. Kanye West says and does a lot of things. All over the map, he's erratic. He would make Donald Trump look like a calm lake in the middle of a storm. That said, this is not a person whose statements you should take seriously. However, it's a person whose candidacy you should take seriously if you're the Democratic Party, if you're the Biden campaign. Again, it could only take a 2 to 3%. A lot of analysts are divided on this. I fall in the camp where I do believe he could pose enough of a threat for it to truly matter. You'd only have to knock off 2 to 3% in certain states of Biden's support to flip that state to Trump. So as crazy and far-fetched as the idea sounds, you're the Biden campaign, you want to take this seriously.
Yeah, I can certainly see how damaging this can be for the Democrats. So it's a really good point that you make. I understand he's missed the filing deadline in many states. Is there any exemptions that can be made to make the ballot in these states? How is that situation looking at the moment?
Not exemptions. You know, once these filing deadlines pass, they're pretty much gone. That said, it's getting pretty late in the game for Kanye West to mount a real independent run for president. Two challenges he faces here. One is time. North Carolina and Texas, going through the major states here that matter. North Carolina and Texas, their ballot deadlines are gone. Okay, right away you're off the map on the two states with a large chunk of votes. This week, coming up in the states, you're going to have Florida and Michigan, both with filing deadlines in the next few days. Almost impossible for him to gather enough signatures in that short space of time. Next two states that would matter are Michigan and Pennsylvania. That would be in the first week of August. Now, money wouldn't be a problem for him. He's got a massive personal fortune. He could put together enough volunteers or paid staff to gather enough signatures in each state to meet the ballot. Florida would be the highest threshold. Some states you don't need a lot of signatures to make the ballot. Some you do. The problem is this would all be done during the middle of a national pandemic. It's really going to be hard to imagine, no matter how much money you have, to put together enough legwork and volunteers or paid staff to get the required number of signatures to get on the ballot. He's really left it late in the game. I'd put it past August 3rd or 4th, anytime in the first week of August. If you don't see him make a move toward running, then he could still run, but it would be such a small ripple that he'd be past the point of being relevant. So this is something that will come to the fore by our next episode, perhaps within the next 3 weeks.
Yep, will certainly be interesting. In other news, Bountygate has created headlines where it's been alleged that Donald Trump had known about a Russian plot to offer bounties to Taliban soldiers for the killing of US troops, which he allegedly failed to act upon. Tavis, we live in a world where stories of scandal are constantly evolving. Trump has weathered many of these storms in the past. What kind of impact do you foresee this having on the election?
Well, the Trump era has brought us 3.5 years of endless revelations and probably 20 books of stories of this magnitude that generate a tidal wave in the news. 3.5 years in many ways has felt like 10.5 years in terms of the news cycle. That said, in this era, because of the constant news cycle and because of the pandemic, you're going to really need a lot of new revelations to create the drip by drip necessary, similar to the Mueller investigation, where you did have multiple news outlets generating new revelations each week during a Friday news dump. Each week, new stories would break. With Bountygate, you really don't have that. You have an original investigation by the New York Times sticking by their story, and then corroborated by the Washington Post, who are also standing by their story. Following that, in the past 2 weeks, you've had some revelations, but none, I believe, enough to really overwhelm the news cycle to keep this a story. In fact, it's fading fast. There really hasn't been anything new that we've learned over the past 4 or 5 days. And in the cycle of a nationwide pandemic, I can't see it breaking through without any additional major. It would take a major news story to get this back on the map.
Sure. The last item that I just wanted to touch upon is the story regarding Roger Stone, where Donald Trump has granted clemency to his old mate and campaign advisor. He's effectively spared him of doing any jail time. And Stone has since confirmed that he will be doing whatever it takes to help Trump be re-elected. Can you see Roger Stone as helping or hindering the Trump campaign?
If anything, it won't have a real tangible effect on people that are already going to vote for Donald Trump. Most of those people's minds, or even swing voters that are leaning Trump, probably are made up. What it will do is provide an interesting new fence or hurdle to climb in the Senate races for endangered Republicans. People that were already Senate candidates that were already trying to distance themselves from Donald Trump simply have another thing to defend, an act which is pretty hard to defend. Roger Stone was due to report to prison last Friday, and so this was widely expected, I should note. Donald Trump was pretty keen on making sure Roger Stone didn't face prison time. He was due to report to prison last Friday night, and so the clemency came down at the last possible minute. Other than Mitt Romney, no other Senate Republican in office, sitting Republican, has come out and explicitly condemned the act. It might put 3 senators, Cory Gardner, Susan Collins, Martha McSally, Republicans that are facing real deficits in the Senate, and I will touch upon that in a future episode for your viewers, but people that are Republicans that are already underdogs it's just going to put another spoke in the wheels for their campaigns.
We're now going to take a look at what's been happening with the markets, and we're going to start by looking at what's been a really popular market lately, being the Democratic vice presidential candidate market. And Tavis, in our first episode, you happened to provide a few tips on a few underdogs, a few roughies in this race. And I can see that they've all shortened. So Tammy Duckworth has come into about half the price of what she was when we filmed the first episode. She's now third favourite at $7.20. The other two that you mentioned were pretty good value was Elizabeth Warren, where we've seen a little bit of support there, and also Michelle Lujan Grisham, who we've also seen a little bit of support. So how do you see this market playing out? Can you see, have you got any, can you provide us with any insight as to why Tammy Duckworth is halved in price from a couple of weeks ago? And what other betting opportunities do you see here?
I think Part of Tammy Duckworth's rise is simply because all candidates do rise and fall on their respective media bubbles throughout the cycle. This is the market. Your listeners do want to keep this in mind. You'll have about 3 weeks left to trade this, and each of these candidates is going to go through a rise and fall. What happened to Tammy Duckworth is now happening in reverse with Val Demings, as you may see. She's fallen down from about fallen out from about 9 to 15 and a half. No real Tammy Duckworth is getting a little more media exposure and doing very well in some of her media interviews. Also got in a spat with Fox's Tucker Carlson, who called her a coward, which probably only endeared her. Getting a spat with Tucker only endeared her to her liberal base. So that would probably be indicative of her rise. That said, all candidates do go through their media bubbles. Karen Bass, I'll point out to you, is 19 and a half. She's undergoing a lot of media pieces this week. Congresswoman from Los Angeles. Personally, I don't think she has a shot at the vice presidency. I'd be absolutely stunned if Biden chose her. But with media exposure, you'll generally see the candidate rise, provided they do well during that exposure in public appearances. The other one I'll point out to you here for a longer shot, maybe if your listeners are interested, would be Gretchen Whitmer. That is, she's the governor of Michigan. Up at 85 just seems astronomical to me. I don't think she's likely, but that's way too high. She's got a real bright future in the Democratic Party, often looked upon as even a possible someone who may prepare a run for president one day. The reason she's so high is because it's presumed that it might not look great to leave your state in the middle of a pandemic and go pursue a run for national office, because it may look like you're abandoning your home state. So I could see why it might drift out. But I do want to say, I think 85 to 1 is pretty nuts. I think that's a little high. But for the rest of it, for the other three you mentioned, I can see why they've all come in.
Yep. Well, I can understand why this market has received so much interest recently, where with Joe Biden at his current age, if he happens to serve the first term, he will be in his 80s, I believe 82, by the end of his first term. So it's quite likely that whoever he does choose as his running partner here could go on to become president of the US.
Absolutely, Pete. And I thank you for mentioning that, because I should have noted that last week. It's widely assumed that if elected, Joe Biden would be a one-term president. I happen to agree with that. I think if Donald Trump were not the president, I don't even think Joe Biden would run for office this year. I think he views himself as a candidate well suited to this singular moment to rid the nation of Donald Trump. That said, at 82, I think privately he's probably confided that he may not run. We don't know that. He's never made a public declaration. But I think I share the view that Biden would probably be a one-term president. And so when picking a running mate, you're not only picking your successor at an old age, again, Biden is 77 right now, but you probably are picking the front runner for the Democratic nomination in 2024. So this is not only who's going to be a good vice president and governing partner for Joe Biden. The second question his campaign are probably asking themselves is who would be a strong nominee in 2024. So you really want to keep that in mind when you're trading this market.
Okay, so moving on to the main market here. Last week you mentioned that Joe Biden was valued at $1.70. He hasn't moved in price. On the other hand, Donald Trump, I believe, was trading at somewhere between $2.90 and $3. He's firmed slightly. Have you got any explanation for the money starting to come for Donald Trump and his price reversing a little there?
Yeah, I'll offer two things there. One, he's come in from about 294 to 278 right there on your screen. And I think that's a little bit of a reaction to the Kanye West news, honestly. I mean, I think it's correctly perceived by a lot of traders that he could threaten enough of a share of Biden's vote. And again, we're talking about low single digits, but he could threaten enough of Biden's vote in certain areas of the United States, in the states that truly matter, enough to harm him. And you'll know Biden's kind of right around where we were when you and I discussed this 2 weeks ago, but Trump has come in a little bit.
Sure.
I think for the first reason is just the mere discussion of Kanye West running. The second reason I'll note is there were a couple polls out of Arizona this week. We have not had a lot of quality polling here since the 4th of July holiday in battleground states, and I'm willing to bet we'll get a ton this week and this weekend. But the recent polls out of Arizona, in both Senate and president, haven't been as great for Joe Biden. For a while, it looked this could just be noise. For a while, it looked like he was putting Trump away in Arizona. 8-point lead, 9-point lead, 7-point lead, in poll after poll, pretty consistently. It was down to 4 this week for Joe Biden in Arizona, which isn't great, but maybe not enough to stun the race into a new equilibrium at the national level. But I think it's enough that it probably could move the market a little bit, and that may be responsible for it. Simply because there weren't enough quality polls. There was a very good poll for Joe Biden in Texas, which I'll note that counterbalances that, but just is probably a reaction from the market on a week when there was very little polling news. And when in the absence of news, the market will react to whatever it has.
Okay. Do you happen to have any other betting suggestions outside of these two markets that we've previewed?
Yeah, take a look at the Republican vice presidential candidate. There's continuing discussion of Trump dropping Mike Pence from the ticket. And this market, I've always had my eye on throughout the campaign. Trump is an erratic presidential candidate that he's truly incomparable to anyone who's run before, both from a media perspective and a handicapping perspective. And at 116 as a lay bet there on Pence, I think it's worth your consideration. I could see this coming into $1.12 pretty soon. And simply because we're approaching the Republican convention, that'll be the 3rd week of August for your listeners. And if Trump continues to get walloped in the national polls, and again, this is going to take till I give yourself 3 weeks to look at this. But by early August, if he's facing a massive deficit in the polling, I wouldn't put it past Trump to do something drastic to shake up the race. And when I say shake up the race, there really aren't a lot of avenues for him to do that. He's running for re-election. He's not going to drop out of the race despite continuing media speculation, and there are odds you can get on that as well. But I don't foresee that happening. I mean, this is a guy who wants to be in front of the camera more than anything, and the last thing I could see him ever doing is walking away from the spotlight willingly. I cannot see that happening.
Sure.
So the one thing he could do to pull the ripcord here is name a new running mate. It creates shockwaves. It breaks through the noise of the pandemic for a few days, generates coverage in the media cycle. And for Donald Trump, it doesn't always have to be bad media or good media coverage. Any media coverage will do. He's been proven. He's been a long time believer in that strategy that all press is good press, and this would be one way to do it. Don't think for a minute that he has the deep, heartfelt loyalty to Mike Pence. If he really, really felt, or if his aides encountered private polling that showed him he could improve his chances by naming a different running mate, all options will be on the table. So if you see even $1.16 is decent value, but I think you could wait a week here and get really exceptional value because this decision will be made in early August. Trump does make decisions on a really impulsive, rapid rate. So I think you at least get $1.14, probably $1.12 here.
Okay, well, it sounds like a pretty good return on investment with that one.
And it would be an entertaining wager to make for sure.